This is a tutorial on how to sync data from a Google Sheet into your table in a Coda doc. And if you want to read more about how this script works, please read the published doc blog post that I have in the video notes. So the goal here is I have a empty Coda table here, and I have things like feature, team, milestones, stage, code completion, and point of contact. Empty table, and I want data from Google Sheets to show up in this table in my Coda doc. If I go to Google Sheets, this is the Google Sheet that I want to sync data from, and you can see here I have the same columns: feature, team, milestone, stage, code completion, POC. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns also exist in my Coda doc. Let's ignore this do not delete column for now, but if I go back to my Google Sheet, you notice I have an empty Coda Source Row URL column right here, and this will become more important as I show you how the script works. So let's go ahead and open up Google Apps Script, and I have a brand new project here. I'm going to rename this to Sheets to Coda Sync. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go to the repo that contains the script, and this is also in the video notes. I'm just going to select the entire script for sheets to coda.js. Going to copy this, go over to Google Apps Script, replace this, and paste everything over. All right. So if I look at this script, really the main things you have to update in order for this sheets to Coda one-way sync to work is these lines right here. So let's start with the library for Google Apps Script. So in order for this script to even start running, you have to make sure that the proper library is installed in Google Apps Script. And so this is Coda's library for Google Apps Script. So I'm going to copy this string of text and numbers, go to resources, go to libraries, and then paste in that text right there, and then click on add. And you should see Coda API pop up here. I'm going to click on version, just click on the latest one, number 8, hit save, and now Google Apps Script knows how to execute some of these commands. So let's go ahead and start filling some of this out. So the first thing you want to find is your API key. So this is obviously very sensitive information. The way you can get this API key is by going to your account settings. And if you scroll down to API settings, you will see all the tokens you've created. You can click on generate API token, my new token, hit generate, and then you can copy this token and then put it into this variable, your API key, right there. And I am going to just delete this for now. I'm going to pause the video for a second so I can copy and paste my actual API key, but don't want to expose it to the video. So I'll be back in 1 second. All right, I went ahead and copied over my API key, which is in the rows above these rows, so you won't be able to see it in the video. So the next 6 rows, these 6 variables are things that you have to get from Coda and from Google Sheets in order for this sync to work. So let's start with the Coda settings. Your target doc ID, what is that? So if I go back to Coda, your doc ID is everything after the _D in your URL. So if I select all these characters right here, I'm going to copy these, go back to the Google Apps Script, and then paste it in here. That's my target, my Coda doc ID, where I'm going to be syncing data into. My target table ID. There's a few ways you can get this. The recommended way I would say is go back to your account settings, and if you scroll to the very bottom, if you click on Labs, click on Enable Developer Mode, and once you do that, you can go back to your Coda doc, and in the table where you want to sync data into, if you click on the 3 dots next to the table name, you'll see Copy Table ID, which is only available if you have Developer Mode enabled. Click on that, go back to Google Apps Script, and then replace this variable with what you just copied to your clipboard. So this is the unique ID for that table. And finally, This is something that you can define, but just no matter what you do, make sure that you cannot have a column in your Coda table with this name. The reason is because the script actually uses a variable called target row ID column with this name. And so just make sure that whatever you do, your table in Coda does not have a name like Coda row ID. If you want to use this name, then all you have to do is go back to the script and change this to something else, like, I don't know, Coda row ID 2 or something. But just make sure that you don't have a column. I'm putting this out here just so that it's very clear that you should not have a column in your Coda doc table that has this name. Okay, onto Google Sheets. This is your source data, your source Google Sheets ID. This is everything from after the /d. So if I go to select this one RM, this is your unique ID for Google Sheets. I'm going to copy this here and paste it here. Your source worksheet name, this is the name of the worksheet you want to sync data from. So I want to sync all this data here into my Coda doc. So this is called tasks 2. I'm just going to write tasks 2 here. Source row column. So this is a really important column. In Google Sheets, I typically just add a column called Coda Source Row URL, and this allows Coda to know which rows have been synced over to Coda from Google Sheets. So you have to add a column typically at the end of your table with this column, and everything in that column should be empty for now. So let's use the same exact name, Coda Source Row URL, and put it here. Coda Source Row URL. All right, so we'll look at these optional settings later, but let's go ahead and try to make this sync work. So let's close this out. So I want to sync data from this table from Google Sheets into this table in Coda. So let's go ahead and click on select function, runSync. This is the main function you want to run when you want to sync data. And then click on this play button. The first time you run a script, it's going to ask you to Google Apps Script is going to ask for permissions to edit or to view your Google Sheets. Hit allow, and also to use Coda. And it's running, and let's go ahead and see if data gets. Sometimes when the script runs, you have to refresh your Coda doc. Other times you don't. I haven't figured out the right pattern for when you have to refresh your doc, but let's just wait for this sync to finish running. And maybe the first time it takes a little longer. But actually, I think, oh, there we go. I guess you don't have to refresh. So this is all the data from your Google Sheet. And you notice a few things kind of get messed up the first time you sync data into an empty table in Coda is your date column. This date column is a simple date. This is like what is it called? The Zulu format or something of dates. So if you want this date to look better, instead of this defaulted to a select list, change this column type to a date. And now future additions to this table will have this proper date format. So let's go ahead and look back at my Google Sheet now. You notice that Google Sheets now added these row URLs to your sheet, and this is really important to not delete any of this data. All these row URLs, they link to a specific row in Coda. So if I look at negotiate prices for EVT production, if I copy this URL and go to Coda and paste this in the URL, it goes to that specific row in the table that has that data. So let's go ahead and let's try to add some rows. So new, let's call this green task, blue task, red task. And I'm just going to call these all packaging. These are all internal dog fooding. These are all building. I'm just going to give these some random. Actually, let's start to give it a new date. So let's see if the date format works. Let's go May 28th. Let's make it to this year, 2020. And let's say these are all Polly's tasks. And again, make sure that when you add new rows to Google Sheets, or whoever is updating the Google Sheets in your company or your team, make sure that the Coda Source Row URL is not overwritten, and new rows that get added to Google Sheet do not contain anything in the Coda Source URL. You might even want to hide this column just so that people know, but I don't like hiding data because then people might accidentally delete it if they're selecting a bunch of columns. So if you are doing this thing, just make sure that whoever is maintaining this Google Sheet and you have edit access to, they're not adding new values to this column. So let's go ahead and run this sync again. And these 3 new rows, which I added to my Google Sheets, green task, blue task, red task, they should show up in my Coda doc. And there we go. They're right down here. It's pretty fast. Okay, let's try to delete some rows. That should be pretty simple. Let's say I want to delete design styrofoam and review proto build blah a. These should be right here. So let's delete these from my Google Doc, Google Sheet. And you notice that the URLs haven't copied over. Sometimes this takes a little longer. You can see how it's still running. I've noticed that this is the slowest part about the script is because what's happening is the script is waiting for Coda to have all these rows updated. Oh, it actually picked. No, I'm not sure what happened there. Let's see. Oh, I think I was updating things too quickly, so that's why the script might have not worked as intended. So let's actually go ahead and delete these rows so we can. Actually, let's just start from scratch so we can have the most updated data in my. Yeah, so again, one thing I want to point out is that this is not a real-time sync. So if you are actually making a bunch of changes in Google Sheets, I wouldn't recommend running this script every minute or so because some funky things can happen. And there's a way we can overcome this with a setting that I have in Google Apps Script. But for now, this is just how it's going to work. So let's run this one more time. Hopefully the snapshot saved in Coda. And let's see this data being copied over correctly. All right, so similar data, green, blue, red tasks. Let's make sure that they're here too. Green, red, blue. Yep. And let's change this date column. All right. And the row URLs should show up here eventually. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds. Again, this takes a little time because what's happening behind the scenes, as I was explaining, is the app script is waiting for the Coda doc to get all the data in this table snapshotted to the Coda servers, and it's waiting to see when the URL is available and to make sure that number of rows in Coda match number of rows in Google Sheets, and then it goes ahead and copies over the URL. So it does kind of depend a little bit on Coda, but I'll talk a little bit about a setting you can use so that it doesn't have to basically work this way, and hopefully this can run a little bit faster for you if you are needing a more real-time sync. This is definitely taking a lot longer than I was hoping for, but hopefully it runs in a timely fashion. This might be a good time to actually go through and walk through some of the extra settings. So while this is running, these 2 columns right here, these 2 values are things that you can use to add a little more flexibility to your sync. So what is this do not delete column? You notice here I have a column here called do not delete. I added it and it's not synced in from Google Sheets. Just want to make sure that you don't, oh, there we have the row URLs there. And what I can do here is if I happen to delete a row in Coda, let's say again I want to delete let's say I want to delete these three rows, send PVT, these three rows. So I'm going to delete these from my doc and then run the script. And you'll eventually these three rows, oh, that was pretty fast. Already got deleted from my Coda doc. Sometimes I want to add data to my Coda doc, but I don't want the sync to overwrite that data or delete that data. So for instance, let's say I'm working my Coda doc and I add like watermelon, orange, kiwi. And I want Coda to keep these rows, because what happens is if I don't do anything right now, I'm just going to copy this over again. If I just leave my Coda table like this, what's going to happen is when I run the sync, Google Sheets doesn't recognize these three new rows in Coda, and it's going to actually delete these rows from my Coda doc. So if I mark these three columns as do not delete, and the key point here is you have to have a column called whatever the column is called. It has to be called the same thing here as in Google Apps Script. The same name has to be used in Coda. And it also has to be a checkbox column format type. And what happens is Coda is going to look, the Google Apps Script will look through your rows and look for any rows that have this checked off. And if it finds that, it won't overwrite these rows or delete them when you run the sync. So if I run this sync now, hopefully the snapshot will have picked up these row changes. Let me give it a few more seconds. But if I run this now, in theory, this will not delete my three rows that I added here, since they don't exist yet in my Google Sheet. Again, this is just to add some more flexibility to your one-way syncing, because if you don't do anything, if you have this column deleted or you don't do anything here, your Coda doc table will always have the same exact data and number of rows as your Google Sheet. So it looks like nothing got deleted. Let's just do a few more experiments. Let's say I want to change some rows here. I'm going to change this and maybe add some nice emojis. Let's see if Coda, the script will, so I change these two rows right here, and this script now will update those rows with that new data. So any updates to rows will also be reflected in the one-way sync to Coda. And there's those three checkboxes and awesome tasks. And the final setting is rewrite Coda table. This automatically gets set to false. And what happens is if you are reading from a Google Sheet that you only have view access only to, you want to set this to true. Actually, the script will actually detect that. But what happens is if you set this to true, what happens is in Coda, every time you run the sync, Coda completely deletes all the rows and then kind of pastes in the existing rows from Google Sheets. If you have this set to false, which it currently is now, Coda, the script is a little more smarter, and it actually looks at which rows actually need to be updated, and it doesn't add and delete rows it doesn't need to basically add. This is kind of like the default if you want to just overwrite every single thing in the Coda table when you want to just run the script quickly. And this might be a workaround for running the script quicker. The problem is if you are trying to like sync thousands and thousands of rows at a time, this might break and it might actually hit some limits in Google Apps Script. But so just I would treat this with a little bit of caution. But for smaller data sets, if you only have like a few hundred rows, this really shouldn't be a problem. So you're going to notice that everything here will get deleted and just get replaced with whatever's in this Google Sheet, because it basically does a complete overwrite from Google Sheets, this data, into your Coda table. And you can see this will always have the most updated data from your Google Sheets. Again, really up to you on which you want to do. I recommend keeping this as false if you have a lot of data that you're updating. True if you want to just, if you don't have that many rows of data, and Coda will just automatically, or Google Apps Script will automatically overwrite everything in your Coda doc each time it does a sync. Okay, the last thing we want to talk about is how we can get this script to run on a regular basis, because I had to press this play button every single time I wanted this to run. Instead, you can create a installable trigger which is time-based in Google Apps Script. Well, let me zoom this out a little bit. And so if I go to click on that little trigger icon, click on Add Trigger, runSync is the main function you want to run. Head is head. Time-driven, leave that checked off. And this is where you can select how often you want your script to run. I wouldn't recommend it running it more than every minute. Maybe like every 10 minutes if you want. You can click on here every 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I'm just leave this on every minute for now. And you can also get notified when something doesn't work. Notify me immediately. And then let's hit save. So now this script will basically run every single minute. And if I click on this and go to executions, you can actually see a log of every single time something's running. So let's go ahead and add a few more rows, more tasks. Hooray, this will sync. Well, hopefully it will sync. I'm just going to copy some of this data here. And remember, I'm going to leave that Coda Source Row URL column alone because, why did that work? Because that's going to be copied over from Coda. So let's go ahead and, I said rewrite table to true. So it's just going to do a whole rewrite of the table, which is fine. It's kind of annoying because then I have to reset the date format for this column. So I guess another downside of using this true switch. So there we go. So again, I set this trigger to run every single minute, and you can see it's running now. And if I click on this drop down, I put in logs inside the script so that it will tell you how many rows are being added, how many rows are being deleted, how many rows are being updated. But since I have this set to true for now, it's not going to show. But you're going to see eventually this will have all the rows I just added here should show up inside. Didn't go yet. I think it's, maybe something got stuck here. Oh, it's still running. Oh. That's not good. I think it might be because I have this thing here. I'm going to delete this column for now. But yeah, essentially, as you are adding new data to Google Sheets, this will automatically show up in this. Oh, and also, I think it's also because of this column. Yeah. So things get a little finicky, basically, if you have this set to true. But it should, in theory, work when you run this every minute or every 10 minutes. So that's how you can sync data from your Google Sheets to Coda Doc.